It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Surprise! Logan and I want to talk into microphones more about football. We only have a couple hours to do this. A round 2 preview. Logan, I am back in D.C. I went straight from the airport to the office. See, I'm in this is where I used to do the show all the time with the Take Command team banner behind me. Here we are. It's time to preview round 2.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do this. Stayed up late last night, watched a little more film. Just, can't get enough draft. Here we are. We're all getting out of our minds. Let's make it happen.
Yep, our minds have been lost. Let's talk about football for a recording that'll be a historical fact for posterity. All right, or we're doing this in part because I wanted to make sure that you got to actually use your knowledge, because they're gonna select maybe 2 guys in the second round, maybe a couple more. We'll see if they trade up, trade back, whatever. And you've studied all these players, Logan. We can't just limit your knowledge to the guys that they pick. But one of the things that kind of I was really struck by as we left our respective microphones last night was you kept I thought you just made a great point, which is clearly they're leading with character, and the character trait they're leading with is competitiveness. So you were going to go back and watch film and kind of be like, all right, who are the guys that really stick out in terms of competitiveness? Who are the guys that scream, I'm a Commander, now that we know nope, this is really how they're doing it. With that said, who are the guys that you kind of circle now at the top of round 2 with pick 36 when you match it up with the board?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple things to look at here. I mean, let's just take tackle because we talked about those guys a little bit last night. So, Roger Rosengartner, Kingsley Suamataia, Patrick Paul, and Kieran Amadiji, right, from Yale and whatever school they're at from before. Anyway, so one thing that when you watch the film, and what I noticed when I talked to some coaches who really evaluate, not here necessarily, but some of my other buddies who really value competitive toughness, is guys will get fixated on a play. So I went back and I watched, Kingsley Suamataia just for fun. And I was like, versus Texas Tech, he's a little raw. He's a little all over the place. He's not super technically sound. But then there's a play where he runs, I want to say it's 65 yards down the field after the running back, on a run. You know what I'm saying? And so that shows up. And then couple that with his athleticism and be like, oh my gosh, this guy's getting after it. And it's not always there, but there's enough of those moments where you're like, maybe this is the right mixture. And then a guy like Roger Rosengarten from UW, I mean, I went back and watched that Michigan game, and I just was like, this guy should be a first-round pick. That's how I came out
really
watching it. And again, it's one game, and it's probably one of his better games. But for example, there's an edge rusher who does a spin move on him, beats him badly inside. He does a match spin, mirrors up, gets in front of the guy, battles the guy, keeps him flat. Penix is able to effortlessly step around. He's got a backside cutoff on a 3 technique, which on a tackle is very, very hard. Overruns the 3 technique, pancakes the guy. Just this tremendous finish. And again, it's not always perfect. The line's a little bit off every once in a while, but I just was like, this guy's awesome. I really enjoy watching him. Just like a football player's football player. And so I came out of that thinking, these are some guys that I really enjoy. Patrick Paul, I think is a little up and down in terms of effort, but occasionally you see him kind of big body finish somebody and you say maybe that's what they're looking for. So my point in bringing this up is just as a sample size, you say to yourself, well, if I like Patrick Paul, hypothetically speaking, I could find plays where he's finishing and playing with great competitiveness. So for me, I think you could probably tell, I'm a Roger Rosengarten stand at this point, right? But I'm well aware that he has his physical limitations, right? He's got 33.5-inch arms, not great. He's 6'6", he's 300 pounds, a little bit on the smaller side for an offensive lineman. I know, which is crazy to say, but I like him and I would give him a shot because I like I like what I see from him on film. But again, if you wanted to, go Kingsley Suamataia because you just wanted the highest possible ceiling of an athlete at this point at that position, I think you could justify that too with some pretty awesome toughness plays on his film.
So I guess my question would be, / my theory of the case would be, competitiveness is not about doing it sometimes. What I'm looking for is someone who does it all the time, who has trouble turning it off. The thing with Jaden Daniels is it's dude, sometimes you need to live to see the next down. Yeah. Discretion needs to be the better part of valor. quit taking these gigantic hits. And that's like part of the reason you love Jaden Daniels and the character, because you're like, look, we can tell him to slide a little bit more. We can tell him to get down more. But if I'm seeing a guy that competes sometimes, or like sometimes has that, especially at O-line, sometimes has that FU to him and sometimes doesn't, like, is that actually not, like, I guess it's kind of like, if it's sometimes, does he actually have it? That would be my question.
Yeah, and I think if you kind of look at, again, I'm making an assumption here. If you look at the guys they were interested in, you're looking at guys like Amarius Mims, you're looking at guys like Jordan Morgan, right? Just
guys that brought in on 30 visits, etc.
Yeah, stuff like that, right? Those guys aren't always super competitive and super tough. But I think what you look at is like, these guys are young guys that have flashed it enough, and you say this can be our standard for them. Like, they're good guys. They have the athletic baseline to get it done. Does that make sense? They have the athletic floor to get it done. And so I think of those other guys, like, that's what's great about those other three guys, the Patrick Pauls, the Kingsley Sumatias, and the Roger Rosengardner. It's really just, I guess my point is, it's all there for them if you're kind of using those other two guys as models, right? They're good football players. There's some technical deficiencies, but you see enough of that kind of those athletic traits where you say, if we like this guy and we get him in the right culture, he could be pretty special for us.
For sure. And to answer my own question, I would agree with what you said, right? Because if I'm Roger Rosengarten, I have to compete like that every play because I have physical limitations. Right. And if you are, as gifted as Amarius Mims or Patrick Paul, like, obviously some different levels there, but like, if you're one of those guys, but like Paul's playing at Houston as opposed to Mims in the SEC, like, I can get away with not having the nastiest streak on every snap because I'm actually that good. But in the NFL, if that's needed and the maturity to coach that up, it can be coached up. You have the maturity there. I think that's absolutely something that, if as long as you see it some, that's going to be enough. And that's the judgment that Adam Peters is going to make is, do I want the guy that I have to coach that up a little bit and trust that he will mature? And then what do I think of him in the personality and the character, if you will, to use that very catch-all term that gets thrown around in the scouting community, versus do I want the guy who I know is going to give it to me, but he might give it to me sometimes and it still might not be good enough. And that's, I think, the question there. If they're all on the board at 36 still, is there, like, and thus you are like, we could wait till 40 if we need to. Is there another player that has dropped that you would be like, they got to go get him? Obviously, the top guys kind of on the consensus board are Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Ladd McConkey, which are all positions that the Commanders certainly are looking at. Keon Coleman is pretty high on a lot of boards. Would you take any of those guys over the tackles at 36? Or are you like, nope, with where we're at, we got to get tackle first, and then we'll see what happens at 40, whether one of those guys falls too, or we maybe even think about trading back from 40 and picking up an extra pick?
I think this honestly becomes kind of like the quarterback dilemma with offensive linemen. At 36, just pick the guy you want and then walk away. You know what I mean? Just make sure you get the guy you have the highest grade on. But to your question, I think when I look at guys that I just couldn't shut off the film, quite honestly, Ladd McConkey is a guy that I just could not shut off his film. Like, he runs routes excellent. He's trying to score every time he touches the ball. The only thing that gives me a little bit pause, like Ricky Pearsall gets drafted by San Francisco.
Yeah, you loved him, and then Kyle took him. I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, that is a Kyle receiver, like, to a T. And I think it's probably between him and Ladd there. I think the thing about Ricky is just a little bit bigger, right? Kind of can play that inside-outside role for you at a really high level. And so the one thing about Ladd, I do think he's a true slot at the next level. So if you're okay with that, and you're okay with not having a huge body kind of receiving presence, in terms of compete and toughness and character, playing through injuries, like, that guy screams Commanders to me. Now, is the value there for them at this pick? Is that the direction they want to go? Again, I go back to the receivers, and there's just so many kind of dynamic playmakers. They all have their deficiencies, but, Malachi Corley's a guy that's name gets thrown around quite a bit. Javon Baker, I love his film. Devontae Walker, maybe not the best hands in the world, but in terms of explosive vertical speed, that guy's special, and so, like, maybe they say we're looking for something different at the position. We're looking for a bigger guy. Johnny Wilson, another guy from Florida State that sticks out to me. And then that kind of gets into the Keon Coleman thing. And I'm having a hard time kind of landing on Keon Coleman. I think he's got the alpha mentality to be a one. I just wonder about his route running technical nuance to get that done. So if you're looking for that competitive drive, it's there, but maybe it's not packaged in the right way, I guess. You know how we talked about how Kingsley Suamataia has this tremendous ceiling, this tremendous athletic upside. I worry that the athletic ceiling for Keon Coleman is maybe not that of a true alpha, big-bodied one receiver in the NFL. He's more of a big slot. And so you got to kind of make that selection accordingly.
Yeah. I think for me, I would also just take the tackle that I want at 36 and then figure it out at 40. Because I think there are so many guys that if someone wants to come up, I'm okay going back 5, maybe even 10 picks, because there are guys that I would circle and be like, I think that guy's probably still around. And this is the hard part. Like once you get to day 2, and especially outside the first 40 picks, like it's a free for all. You could have guys that you have a 5th round grade on that come off the board, and you're like, sweet, that guy, we weren't going to consider that guy till halfway through tomorrow. But you're also going to have guys that, you think, oh yeah, we're on this guy, and they get swept up ahead of you. But I mean, Corley's definitely a guy that I've got circled because he's that hybrid, like receiver, running back body type that I think is becoming in vogue in general, with Deebo Samuel being the ultimate model. But as we've talked about with multiple people, most recently Charles Davis, and I talked about this with B. Mitch actually yesterday. He could be your kickoff returner, and that matters all of a sudden. So like, I think he's an interesting guy. Max Melton, corner out of Rutgers, TJ Tampa, corner out of Iowa State. Like, there's enough guys that if I can get an extra pick somehow, I think the hard thing though is like we live sometimes, I think, in the fantasy land where it's like, oh, well, if we could trade back to 45 and also pick up 55, and it's like, one, I don't think there's a team that actually has those 2 picks, and 2, they're not giving you that. You're getting like an extra 5th at this point to move around, maybe a 4th. So I do think that is something to consider as well. That like, what kind of value are you really getting? If you can somehow pick up another top 100 pick in this draft, amazing. If you can pick up a 3rd, frankly, or God forbid a 2nd next year, depending on where you're moving, that would be awesome, because teams undervalue future picks in a really, really dramatic way. But there are enough guys that I feel pretty good as long as you get the tackle, because the other positions that dropped, corner, receiver, where you definitely are looking if you're Washington, there are a plethora of options on the board.
Yeah, and I you asked me, like, are there any guys that stick out to you as just true, like, compete guys? And so I've, like, highlighted a couple names here at the positions you were talking about. So one is Jalen Polk from UW, the receiver. And, like, that dude is an absolute dog and a half, man. And if you want someone who's going to compete and fight for you every single down, contested catch monster, 6'2", 210 pounds, kind of a little stiff, but man, is a absolute dog, right? TJ Tampa, you mentioned him already. Enes Rexstraw Jr., I like him. I don't love him, but has that kind of like barky, chippy competitiveness that you love to watch on film. Javon Bullard, the safety from Georgia. Kamari Lassiter is a guy who didn't run as well as people thought from Georgia, but like I think has that kind of it factor from a competitive standpoint. Edgerrin Cooper, the linebacker from Texas A&M, I've never seen a guy that I thought that just screamed to me more like Dan Quinn than him. He's got long, like 34.5-inch pass rush arms. He's 6'2", he's 240. He ran a 4.5. He rushes well from the line of scrimmage. Like, think about how they use their linebackers. Like, think about them bringing in Frankie Louvu, just this movable chess piece. And those guys together moving forward is pretty dangerous. And then
it also sounds like, that starts to sound, he's just not, like, he's not the level of athlete that Micah was, but like, that's how Micah Parsons started. Remember, they drafted Micah Parsons in Dallas as a middle linebacker. And then they're like, he's too good of a pass rusher. And not that Edgerrin Cooper's going to go all of a sudden be a second-round pick that you take at 40 that turns into Micah freaking Parsons. But, like, that package exists in the playbook for Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. to know what to do with a guy like that as they kind of figure out where the best use for him is as a young player.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other 2 guys that I've got highlighted on my sheet, at least for the second round, are Fisk from Florida State, the defensive tackle. Like just there's certain guys you watch the film and you're just like, how is this guy not tired? Like, he's playing so hard. And then him and Marshawn Nealon plays that exact same way. And like, I just think, like, if you're looking for a dude that screams, Mike Sanders still, the slot corner, again, he's a slot corner, so does that fit a need necessarily? But man, like, those guys are absolute maniacs. And I say, like, and that's a cool thing when you turn on the film and you're just like, those are 10 guys I just mentioned that you're like, these guys compete at the highest level. So I think that's the other fun thing about going through this last night and going through it a little bit this morning is just seeing how many like really solid football players there are and thinking about the Commanders having 5 picks in this group of guys. You know what I'm saying? You're talking about Max Milton, like he might be a 3rd round pick, but the Commanders could still get him. You know what I'm saying? Like there's just all these guys that are pretty dynamic. So I don't know. It's a really interesting, exciting. Adisa Isaac is another guy that flashes to me from Penn State. And so, like, there's 12 guys
Dane
for
Brugler
you.
told us, like, he circles that guy as a Commander.
Yeah.
He's like, that's a Dan Quinn player.
And just, like, the competitiveness, the toughness, and that's a lot of fun, I think. And it gets me excited. So, like, obviously, if the tackle's shirt up, you know, or maybe you think Lad McConkey's the guy and then you take a tackle at 40, as long as that tackle's kind of shirred there, I think there's a lot of excellent, really competitive, tough football players that get me really excited for the Washington Commanders moving forward.
For sure. And just wrapping up here, I think that the last point that you kind of touched on in there that I'm going to go back, circle, and highlight and underline here is they got 5 picks today, not 2. Like 67 will be up fast enough and 78 and then 100. And those, like some of these guys that we mentioned might be available. Some of them, you know, you kind of mentioned as 3rd rounders potentially. Some of them could go high. I mean, Max Milton could be 40. He could be 67. He could be 78. That's the fun. But there are definitely dudes in that Washington, you know, kind of has in this dog mentality mold that are going to be available, and they're just a little physically limited, which is why they become 3rd round picks. But I think this is worth remembering too. And I just had this conversation, you know, live on air with Russell, is while getting the quarterback important is really important for Adam Peters and probably is the thing he's going to be judged by ultimately in the end, which hopefully is, you know, decades from now, because Jaden Daniels was awesome and they, you know, this was the start of something, right? He has made his money as a general manager, assistant general manager, as a scout, whatever, in these middle and late rounds. Like getting the Fred Warners of the world, finding these guys, even late first, right? They never really had high first once they got rolling there in San Francisco. And he goes and gets a guy like Ayuk. So his ability to know what he's looking for and find it, and then work with the coach to be like, hey, you know, I got you what you're looking for. Now go use it like you said you would, and that guy's gonna be pretty good. That is what. I don't want to. Well, I say one, it's what's going to make Adam Peters like a known name, is like a legend of a drafter here within the scouting community. But 2, it is the kind of thing that also provides you insurance. And this is why they had so much success in San Francisco, despite the fact that they missed on Trey Lance. And they had to trade up to get Trey Lance. But they were so good in these middle and late rounds that it just didn't matter. And part of that was they nailed Purdy ultimately with the last pick of one of these drafts. But guys like Warner have really carried them. And so, you know, if I'm Josh Harris and I'm like going to Adam Peters tonight, hey man, good luck, go get him, do the thing you did in San Francisco, and we're going to be just fine.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And I think, and again, you just go back to the tenants, man. Like those guys that they've identified, that Dan talks about in his presser, that Adam kind of echoes, or I don't know whose perspective that is,
right.
But they're both talking about it. I think, you know, one of the fun things about watching film of the top 100 guys in this draft, they're all good, right? But the thing that kind of gives you the most confidence that they're going to be good pros is the stuff that they talk about with Jaden. It's not the stuff on the field. It's the how he preps off the field, how he competes, all this other stuff. And it's the same with this next group of guys, right? And there's certain positions where it's where maybe the preparation isn't as important, but you need dudes who are competitive sons of guns, and they want to build a competitive culture, and you do that by bringing in competitive people. So I think that's something that I again, you're talking about like that. When you look at the guys like the George Kittles, the Warners, all these guys, when I was in San Francisco, they are hyper competitive in every situation, and they have an opportunity to do that same thing here, which is pretty awesome. So
no doubt. So here's how I'm going to close out this pod. I'm not going to tell you when the next podcast is because I don't know. Logan and I might just decide, hey, we're going to do one tonight after the 2nd and 3rd round. Probably not tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning. I think that's a much safer bet. But we might just decide to wait till this thing is over and do a big old recap on Sunday that you'll either get on Sunday or Monday. So you're like, Craig, that's not very helpful. Here's what the helpful part. Subscribe to Take Command. Then, as soon as it's available, ta-da! It's in your podcast feed. That's how that works. So go to your favorite podcast app and hit the follow if you're in Spotify, subscribe if you're in Apple Podcasts, whatever the button is that gets new episodes to your phone as soon as possible in your favorite app. But that is it. That is all for this edition of Take Command. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and we will see you with a recap of some sort after more decisions have been made. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.